If our world continues to use non-renewable resources and energy at this frighteningly rapid rate, the consequences will be disastrous. When we say non-renewable energy, we are referring to resources like coal, crude oil, and natural gas, which are also known as fossil fuels. And not only are these fossil fuels sure to run out, but their use intensifies the greenhouse gas effect, creating an atmospheric blanket over our planet, trapping heat, and ultimately warming our Earth. So what do we do? The simple answer is, we've got to find energy alternatives. My name is Andy Liebert, and this is Islands on Alert, a podcast where we discuss how climate change has already affected our islands, what's in store for us if the Earth continues to warm, and how we can help to reduce the devastating impacts. As with most of the world, small island states have historically depended on foreign oil, and the terms of our energy use and access are largely out of our control. Many of our remote territories are small open economies with narrow resource bases and a limited ability to benefit from economies of scale. Yet green tech engineers and advocates from small island states have been pioneers in developing renewable technology. And through this massive green revolution, ushering in a new era of wind, solar, and geothermal renewable energy, a better and cleaner world is promised to us. But will this transition be easy? Will we assume the driver's seat to make the necessary changes? In other words, how much control will we have over our destiny as we take on relatively new frontiers? Will small island states adjust to this changing market of renewable energy resources in the best possible way for all segments of our society? What does availability look like for us? Coordinating this transition in a fair and equitable way requires lots of access and planning. Today I'll be speaking with two small island experts at the forefront of this green energy revolution. Okay, I'm excited today because I have the pleasure of welcoming a fellow Antiguan, Stanley Barreto. Stanley is the project developer and director of MegaPower Unlimited. Now, MegaPower is an electric vehicle provider whose mission is, and I quote here, push the transition towards a zero emissions, carbon-free transportation throughout the Caribbean. Now, thank you so much, Stanley, for being here with us on our podcast.
Hi, Andy. Morning. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. Now, first of all, a little bit about your company.
Sure. So we began in 2012 in Barbados. Attention that something was missing across the region, and that was sustainability. For example, in Barbados, which has its own dollar, the foreign exchange leaving the country was an absolute detriment. So what we did is we posed a very valid argument to the government, showing them critical numbers of what was this impact on the country and how could this impact be extended across the region. Long story short, little to no islands in the Caribbean except for Trinidad produce its own oil. So all of the money to live this fossil fuel based lifestyle was leaving the nation and creating more burden, should I say, for local economies. We also posed the concern that if we didn't switch, climate change, which at 2012, some would say wasn't as pressing as it is now, but we would argue that fact, we needed to start a change. And so we began with only a few vehicles, and then we expanded to my home country of Antigua in 2016, just because we saw an opportunity to grow. And ever since then, we've now exceeded over, the number keeps expanding literally every day. We're probably over, I want to say 820 vehicles across the Caribbean. And we're growing at a very rapid rate over the past 2 years. We also are involved in renewables because we don't believe in just transitioning your vehicle from a combustion vehicle to an electric vehicle, though that is more efficient. We believe in completely offsetting your vehicle. So for example, if someone were to go electric, our absolute goal is to make them carbon neutral or even carbon negative if we can, by doing an associated renewable system that they may not own, but that is integrated into the grid by our company, offsetting the power needs for those particular vehicles.
Now, does MegaPower also invest in renewable energy beyond electric vehicles? And in what way do they help to change the offsetting systems?
Yes. So, I mean, by standard, if someone were to switch, many would make the argument, hey, the power production isn't that efficient. I mean, a lot of the Caribbean uses heavy fuel oil, which, without getting too complex, is the largest polluter per gallon burnt. It is actually the dirtiest part of oil when the refinery process is done. And a lot of nations use that for its power production. But nonetheless, what we wanted to do as an organization was incorporate renewables, whether we install them, because I am actually a certified installer and engineer who does these systems for people, or if we did systems for second or third parties, or government bodies that we knew could be large enough to offset vehicles on the road. And so in simple terms, what we were doing was aggregating how much renewables we've installed as an organization, how much renewables we own as an organization, because we actually own a tremendous amount of renewables as well. Both of our offices are powered by renewables. In Barbados, we're actually off grid, but technically still connected to the grid. And so what we did was try to say, okay, these vehicles on an average, and we get numbers every day, are driving this many miles every day across the whole Caribbean. This is consuming this amount of electricity. And we take very conservative numbers. We're not exasperating the numbers so it looks good for us. And then and our goal was to say, these numbers are helpful in the sense that we know, okay, we've produced enough renewable energy to offset the demand for all the vehicles on the road today. And with that, we continue to do that. So, for example, as an organization, we're always installing renewables. It's actually a very active part of our business. And so we continue to say, well, you know what? You're not just taking a car, you're taking a new lifestyle. And that lifestyle is to be carbon neutral. And so and for many people, transportation is their biggest single impact. I mean, there's other organizations, there's other parts of an economy that do pollute slightly more than transportation, but for any single individual, their car is their greatest polluter. So we really just wanted to eliminate that pollution factor.
Okay, great. So Stanley, we've obviously talked about the nature of EVs at face value. But let's dig a little bit deeper and talk about the specifics of renewables. What exactly is this technology, and really and truly, how does it work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the most common that most people know is solar. And then, of course, you get into wind. Those are the most prominent in the market. There are other aspects of renewables. And should I say, by all standards, I count renewables as sustainable sources of energy. Renewables, by its primary or primitive definition, means a source that is continuously renewable. So, for example, some would argue biomass, which is the burning of our forests, can count as renewable. I would argue that, and I think many scientists today are saying that's not a renewable source. But long story short, solar and wind are the primaries. They're economically efficient now. They're actually cheaper than any source of combustion power production. And they really are very straightforward. So, for example, in talking about solar, the photovoltaic cell is just a negative and positive membrane exchanging electrons, which are excited by the sun, the UV rays of the sun, and then the electrons pass through this membrane, which then creates power. When someone looks at a panel and says, can this power my house all day? Keep in mind, of course, these electrons are only excited by UV rays, and the sun only shines during the day. So your power production is limited by sun exposure. And so what happens is these panels will produce power for an extremely long period of time. The silicone degradation on the panel, and silicone is what the panels are largely made of. It takes now, the technology's gotten so good that the panels will take about 30 years before you really have to worry about eliminating or changing them. So, I mean, for most people, they'll last the lifetime or more of your home. But they have the capacity to take care of all your needs. So in simple terms, let's say somebody had 8 or 12 panels. That today is the equivalent of producing 4 units of power every hour for about 6 hours in a day throughout most of the Caribbean region. And the average consumer of electricity in Antigua, at least I can speak for, not necessarily everywhere in the Caribbean, 4 units of production for 6 hours a day, you're now what, at 24 units? That's more than most people's consumption. So solar in an aggregate form has the ability to offset all your demands, but doesn't necessarily produce that power 24/7. And so that's where batteries come into play now, which have been a massive facet of renewables. And that just allows you to store the excess and use it when you need to. Say when you come home from work and the sun is down and you wish to operate a green lifestyle. And then the great thing too now is these electric vehicles are being closer and closer formatted to be a control unit for your renewables. And what that simply means is you could plug in your car and bidirectionally take power from your car, but distribute power to your car. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily have to buy a fossil fuel generator anymore. You just plug in your car to a charger that we as an organization or many proper technicians could install, and your vehicle could now power your home. And most of the electric vehicles on the road now can power your home for in excess of 2 to 3 days. Because some of the packs that these vehicles are coming out with 200 miles and 250 and 350 miles of range have a tremendous amount of battery. And so, I mean, in simple terms, for example, most people are familiar with Tesla as they were the protagonists for most of the electric vehicle revolution.
Correct.
I don't think a lot of people know this, but they're the first person to ever roll out an electric vehicle. It was actually not Nissan. But yeah, so for example, their batteries are 80 units in size and 80 units of electricity. As I told you, most people aren't even consuming 24 a day. You do quick math there, 80 units of electricity from the car could easily take care of you for over 3 days.
3 days. Wow, wow. That's incredible. But can you break down why this is so important for us in small island states?
So in simple terms, it'll save us as consumers real money. And I think anybody who pays attention to the fuel bill of the nation, and I mean, that information is sadly very privileged. It's very hard to come by to understand how much are we spending. I know through relationships that we've had with other organizations in Antigua, the numbers of barrels of oil that we are consuming is quite high now. We're in excess of 1 million barrels of oil used per year. And so if someone were to know the market price for a barrel of oil, you could determine very quickly all of this money is leaving the country. And this money could be spent on infrastructure. This money could be spent on development, better schooling. This money could be used for energy independence. And so, for example, there's a lot of opportunity here where this money doesn't need to be sent out of the nation and can be used for growth of the country. And so, for example, if a country like Antigua, which is perfectly suited, were to switch to full renewables, there's no additional fuel cost. Once installed, it's done. You operate the system. It's practically maintenance free for the next however long, as long as it's operated correctly with properly qualified personnel. And you now have this tremendous savings factor that you can use for better healthcare, better energy infrastructure, better road infrastructure, better food systems, better transportation systems. And so, I mean, there's a ton of opportunities it does here. And then on top of that, it'll make our health better. So for example, if anybody's ridden a bicycle behind a combustion vehicle, you know, sometimes you don't want to get too close because that feeling that you get when you're breathing that in, it just makes you feel bad, and the smell is never too attractive. And I'm being polite on that one. But yeah, so for example, the combustion of fuel behind a combustion vehicle produces a lot of toxins that we shouldn't be breathing in. Carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide. I mean, and for example, these two, just to name a few, actually restrict oxygen flow in the body. And for asthmatics or for people who do have health issues or are over the age of 65, you create additional problems. You burden our health system. And then, for example, people like in Antigua who use medical benefits, which is a social health system, you create more burden on the country. So, I mean, there is no bad here. The only thing, I mean, the biggest argument people throw at me sometimes when it comes to renewables is, hey, if I put a wind turbine up, what's going to happen to the birds? And in all fairness, I do say, you know what, that's a valid point. But in context, there's so much technology improving this. And also, I will mention a cat kills more birds than a wind turbine. And a wind turbine is the size of a massive building. But nonetheless, people in the industry are saying, hey, we are making extensions or expansions so that we can avoid this problem, whether it's putting reflective purposes on the wind turbine blades themselves or creating a resonating sound from the blade, which deters the birds, because these birds do operate sometimes by listening while also flying. And so, I mean, it's not like the problems are gone ignored, whereas as we stay in a fossil fuel world, the problems are ignored because they know that they can't fix the problems as we continue to burn more fossil fuel.
Okay, well, let me put this to you as well. And this podcast is sponsored by, as you know, AOSIS, and they would look at your efforts and applaud it. As a matter of fact, commend it highly. Because here we are at the very center of the advocacy for making a difference in climate change. So we can look at other states in the Caribbean and with a company like yours, like MegaPower, and show that going green is actually the way to go. So we're not only calling for change, but here it is, we are a living example of that change.
Yes, absolutely. And we've reached a climactic point where before, and a lot of my fellow professors, or should I say, those who gave me a lot of knowledge that I have today, um, gave me a very simple point. And prior to this advent of renewables, problems created more money than solutions. So, for example, if we found something that was very lucrative and it had negative externalities, it didn't matter. And so, for example, there was a tremendous amount of money to be made, for example, like the extraction and drilling and refining of oil. And should I say, nobody was concerned about the problems. But now we've reached a very beautiful transitional point where the solution is creating more money than the bad. And so you do see a transition that's naturally been very good for a lot of people, and it can create a tremendous amount of jobs while also giving that psychological feel good of, you know what, I'm not necessarily giving you or selling something that I know has negative impacts. I'm doing something that's great for the planet, great for my family, and I feel proud in doing it. And should I say, there's a ton of opportunity in the field. I mean, and every day I always tell people, you should be involved in the field. It is the future. And they say, well, you know what about in a few years' time? What's it going to look like? It's only going to get bigger because we are in a transitional point and there's going to be more opportunity and the technology is getting better. I mean, for example, when we first started the company in 2012, batteries had an average lifespan of 6 to 7 to 8 years under proper management. Now batteries have a lifespan of 23 to 25 years. And then we're about to reach a threshold where things like this will have 35-year lifespans. And the same thing applied for solar panels and wind systems. These things are tremendously efficient now, to the point where if someone were to do a comparative cost, you're actually saving yourself money just without incurring the concern of, hey, is this bad for the world? You're saving yourself money just as for a one-to-one comparison.
Important question, and we have discussed this before, Stanley. Is there opportunity for those whose jobs are rooted in the fossil fuel industry?
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, for example, one of the most important persons here in Antigua, Mr. Gregory Georges, we had a sit down not too long ago, and I think these guys understand that this is the transitional point. And for example, it's not like a service such as these would go obsolete. So for example, as your point of a gas station, the gas station would just change from what it's providing. It could still be a station providing fuel. It just doesn't have to be a gas station. And so, for example, what can happen is you can pull up when your electric vehicle and receive what we call fast charging, DC fast charging, buy your goods or whatever you need to do, and then incur a similar service, except there's no concern about fuel burning. And should I say, you still, because I mean, a lot of these organizations, they don't necessarily make money from the sale of fuel, and that part does need to change. And should I say, there's no shying away from that. But it just changes what you are selling. It doesn't change the service you're offering. You are still offering a fuel source. And so, for example, other organizations like West Indies Oil, who hold and refine the fuel, they are a tremendous amount of technicians, engineers, qualified financial, I mean, you name the field, they are persons who, for example, if this were to be a renewable company, they could then provide a different fuel source or a different power source. And so they're actually doing that. I mean, West Indies Oil signed a memorandum of agreement or understanding with the Ministry of Environment just recently, showing that we want to transition, we want to give a little bit more opportunity to change. And so they're going to do, from my understanding, solar carport units which utilize electric vehicle charging and allow for a different sale, so to speak. They're still selling a fuel source again, but this one is just an infinite source that we get from the sun. And there's, I mean, don't get me wrong, the organizations do this all the time. Much the same as APC, Antigua Power Company. You don't eliminate these jobs, you just transition what is creating the energy or what is creating the fuel. And it's very simple and so much better for all of us.
How do you see this change happening? Is it going to be a sort of phased kind of situation? And what presently are the obstacles being faced in terms of making this transition happen?
Yeah, yes, I do see it being phased. I will admit the phases have been a bit slow to this point. So we do got to step up the phases going forward from 2021. I will add the point that we do need to get requalified in certain things, but I mean, it's nothing that any qualified technician would find truly difficult. For example, I say the production or energy production of solar, as I mentioned, is within the time frame in which the sun is shining, or wind is when the wind is blowing, whereas fossil fuel power production can happen all day long at any point, because all you need is the fuel to burn to create the power. So then you have to understand, okay, you know what? This is a variable source of power. I need to manage this variable source of power, and I need to have a format for storing when it produces a tremendous amount of excess. And so this is where you get into storage solutions that work integratively with the renewables, and you say, hey, you know what? We have a ton of solar to power Antigua. The solar is producing all day long, but then we have the problem in the evening. What do we do? And then you create what we call hybrid systems, to where, let's say, wind and battery, because the wind blows actually more than 50% of a day. And many times in the evening when it's cooler, there's actually a good amount of wind. So for example, you say, hey, you know what? Solar can suffice for a lot of my daytime needs. Let's use battery and wind to suffice for my evening needs. And then also on top of that, the technology is improving. We're at the threshold now where we're trying to crack the best technology to use ocean and wave and tidal energy. And the great thing about ocean energy is it's very predictable, unlike the sun and unlike the wind. So, I mean, there is new opportunities. There will have to be some retraining, but it's not to the point where anybody would lose a job or be obsolete, because you still need people to manage these sources, people to distribute this energy, people to provide this service. And so I think the phases, as I mentioned, do need to step up. They or go a little bit faster, but you're not eliminating people from opportunity. You're just transitioning the opportunity to something that's so far better for everybody involved.
The huge contradiction is that our islands contribute so little to the global carbon levels, and this is becoming a major talking point around the world. So tell us about your role as MegaPower, and I see that you're trying to spread your footprints across the Caribbean in managing and controlling emissions. As I said before, commendable. Now, what do you think are the possibilities here?
Great question, Andy. We've actually been actively involved with a lot of governments across the region on what they can do and then how can we help, because we are a consortium of expertise and knowledge on how electric vehicles can work. And also we've been very densely involved in renewables. So we're at the forefront many times of, hey guys, what do we do if we have these electric vehicles and we want to charge a building or maintain a building's power needs? Because we know the renewables will go on and off, so to speak, when clouds come over the sky or wind drops. What do we do? How can you help us? And we do that all the time. We get consultations where we're asked for help, and we readily offer that help up all the time. But I mean, it's something we try to actively get involved in. We've never shied away from helping governments and what they want to do. So for example, a lot of people don't know this, but in Barbados, 35 buses were just recently put on the road, all fully electric. And I mean, these were mass transit buses, big buses holding 40 to 45 persons per bus. And we did not actually sell those buses to the government of Barbados. That was a direct manufacturer to government relationship. though we were engaged as a service relationship. They knew a party like us existed. It made this process reasonable, and we were the only reason, in short, and I don't mean to say this arrogantly, but we were the main reason that this opportunity could occur. Because both the manufacturer and the government said, you know what, you have somebody here who knows what they're doing. They can help us out. So we're okay with giving you 35 of our buses. And you look like with their help, you can do this and this can work out well. And then the same thing applies for renewables. I mean, myself in particular, and I'm never good at talking about myself, but there's a lot of relationships that I have with personnel here to say, you know what, they want to do renewable projects for the clinics, for the schools, for a lot of the government facilities. But this is new knowledge. This is new skills. Can you help us, Stan? And I'm like, absolutely. I mean, my biggest pet peeve is let's turn these systems on as fast as we can. Let's not waste time. And if you don't turn them on fast, you will hear me complain. So that's really all I do mostly there is try to help. And we as an organization are continuously doing that. I mean, we've gotten into some really cool things of like, how do we recycle the batteries out of the vehicles at a later term down in the future? Because that is a question that gets posed. How do we transition a combustion vehicle to make it an electric vehicle or retrofit it, so to speak? We share a lot of this knowledge openly. And people would be surprised, because I think sometimes that happens in the Caribbean is we have tremendously intelligent people all over the Caribbean, but we seem to get a knowledge drain where they leave the region. And what happens sometimes is people that do stay, they get a little bit greedy with the knowledge, and they sometimes don't share when they could share. We don't suffer from that issue. The one thing most people tell you when they talk to Stan is like, hey, this guy's willing to tell me the entire book or the entire course that he paid an infinite amount of money to learn because he knows it's in our better interest. And I think, again, as a company, we know that if everybody wins, we win as well. And that's the ultimate goal.
Now, I want to digress into something a bit personal on your part, that is. And obviously, this issue is extremely pertinent to your life. So, can you share that story with us that sparked your interest in working in green tech?
Yeah, and Andy, I mean, it's pretty straightforward for a lot of us. If you were here back when Hurricane Lewis ripped us apart, and at the time that was catastrophic. I mean, most people never seen a hurricane of that kind of brutality. And as a young child, I was just like, this thing is insane. It took off our roof and threw it in the front yard, and it ripped out portions of the home to the point where, I mean, I think a lot of us were without power for months at a time, and we were without water for a tremendous amount of time as well. And I said to myself, you know what? These things look pretty scary, and I do get the sense, and I mean, even as a young kid, I kept asking so many questions to the point people would get irritated. And a lot of people were saying, you know what? Are these hurricanes going to get worse? And if one this bad hit us, what makes them get worse? And so, I mean, I did a little bit of studying as a kid, and I realized this is what's causing these problems. And this is what's been hidden is, I mean, big organizations like ExxonMobil or I mean, BP, you name it. And I'm not going to shy away from it, but they did a great job or PR job of not letting us know the externalities or impacts of using fossil fuels. And so as a young kid, I realized, hey, we got to start changing. And it was weird because, I mean, a lot of kids at that age don't think about things like that. But I just said, okay, whatever happens after this point, I got to find the path, whether it's through school, whether it's through career opportunities, to get involved in this and make change. And so, I mean, after that impact of Lewis and what I saw it did to our country, there was just this need to make a more sustainable change. There was a need to maybe, because as we reduce, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but as we reduce our CO2 in the atmosphere or our greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we actually reduce the heat factor in the atmosphere. And then anybody who's, I mean, slightly aware of a hurricane knows that its power comes from heat and its power comes from hot water. And so, for example, if the Caribbean Sea or the Atlantic Sea is very warm and there's nothing disturbing this warmth, you have the opportunity for super hurricanes, which no one wants to see happen. And then you create a volatility that's no longer natural in its cycles, but can be very, very intimidating for people who say, I want to stay here, but is it rational for me to stay here if these hurricanes are at this brutality level?
Okay, I really want to thank you, Stanley, because living in the islands, we certainly have a closer and shared experience. I'm sure you can recall Lewis in 1995 and the catastrophic damage it caused to Antigua. I actually wasn't home at the time. I was at university in Jamaica, returned home actually, anxious, very anxious, and found a major portion of my roof actually gone, swept away in the winds. And I remember clearly the tears coming to my eyes when my mom told the story of how she and a friend they had to shelter in the bathroom, and the bathroom was actually the only area of the house that was left covered. So we live this experience every year, and I want to say that efforts like yours will hopefully help in making a difference for our future.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, I got to say to everybody, I mean, we all got to take a part in it. And should I say, we can create our own hope. We can create our own change. I'm no more special than anybody else. I mean, if somebody were to ask my story, I didn't come from privilege. I didn't understand what great opportunities were out there, but I went for every single thing that I thought was achievable, and I haven't stopped since. And so I think there's a lot of chances for everybody out there. And this change creates new opportunities, new jobs, and a very positive outlook for the Caribbean and places like Antigua in particular, because when we make this change, we create a greater independence and more sustainable country.
Great. The stories of resilience and hope coming from our small islands. Thank you for your contribution to it, Stanley. All the very best.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me, guys.
We'll be right back after the break. Have you ever wondered what our future might look like with a cleaner alternative to fossil fuels? Well, today we have the opportunity to speak with Arieta Rakai, and she'll be answering this very question. She's an energy analyst working in the renewable and environmental industries. Right now, she works as a program officer for SIDS Lighthouses at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA for short. Welcome, Arieta.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be with you, and looking forward to our discussion. And also thanks to AOSIS for having me on this platform.
Now, just to start out, where are you from, and from where in the world are you speaking right now?
I'm based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, so
Okay.
that's in the Middle East. But I'm originally from the Fiji Islands, from the Pacific.
I'm interested to know now, how did the SIDS Lighthouse initiative begin? And further, how is IRENA involved with the initiative?
The SIDS Lighthouses initiative came about as a response to the call by the SIDS leaders for action through the SIDS action modalities, the Samoa pathway, in 2014. So in response, the International Renewable Energy Agency came up with this framework for action to support SIDS in energy transition and climate action. And we provide support through the SIDS Lighthouses initiative for NDC enhancement, the nationally determined contributions commitment to the Paris Agreement, enhancement and implementation, the policy regulatory framework. We look at capacity building. We look at grid, the technical analysis, grid integration, roadmap, resource assessment, and strengthening capacity, all chains of renewables, and not only in the electricity sector, but also beyond. And there's also a platform for knowledge sharing of best practices and sharing with SIDS what the best practices from the developed countries as well. Moving on to the International Renewable Energy Agency, we are housed in the agency, in IRENA. And it's an intergovernmental organization. There are 163 member countries, of which about over 40 are small island developing states. And our mandate is to support our members in energy transitions, all facets. That's policy, technical analysis, the political, look at the political engagement as well, capacity building, and investment. Most of all, especially now, is the key.
Well, Arieta, this would of course require funding, capacity building, and things of that nature. And I would suppose this is where SIDS Lighthouses and IRENA come in, right?
That is right. So the SIDS Lighthouses initiative is, amongst other initiatives, brings together the development partners from the developed countries to work together with SIDS in this. Not only the soft-based activities, but also to facilitate the investments that is needed to actually put these projects on the ground and make a difference.
Now, when you talk about renewable practices through these initiatives, how is green tech incorporated?
The backbone of the SIDS Lighthouses initiative is that lighthouse providing a way forward, and light comes from an energy source. You can either get it from a generator, or you get it from a solar powered setup, a solar home system, or mini grid, or a windmill, and these are available, abundant in SIDS. So what SIDS is, the Lighthouses is trying to do is trying to promote that we make use of our local resources, with the right funding, with the right support, with the right partnerships, we can use what is available right there to provide our energy needs.
Another question for you. What do you see for the future of green technology and IRENA? Are you seeing successes from your efforts?
Let me put it this way. SIDS have been the leaders in energy transition. I won't, give credit to SIDS Lighthouses because it's a village, it's a collective effort, right? But SIDS in themselves have taken ownership to set ambitious targets. They have made a commitment to transition from fossil fuels to the different types of renewable energy, and even looking at the new types of renewable energy, ocean-based or green hydrogen, for example. Yes, we have seen a lot of progress. Looking at the targets of the SIDS Lighthouses initiative, we had set 5 gigawatt by 2023. But as we speak right now, there is already 5.94 gigawatt on the ground. We've already surpassed it by 3 years. So this speaks volumes of SIDS commitments. In spite of the challenges, they are way ahead. And they are not the largest emitters, right? But we are the one that has to face the worst consequences of climate change.
Now, obviously, Arieta, the movement is vast, and thanks to so many diverse groups and people being involved. I actually had the opportunity to speak with a good friend of mine, fellow Antiguan, Stanley Barreto. He is the director of MegaPower, which is an electric vehicle provider for the Caribbean islands, and involved as well in green technology. Now, there's an abundance of energy in the Caribbean coming from offshore winds and bright sunny days, I'm sure you're quite familiar. Let's take the Fiji Islands or Antigua and Barbuda, for instance. Now, do the energy grids in these states have to be completely overhauled or remodeled to facilitate the incoming green technology?
To some extent, yes. We provide technical assistance through the grid stability analysis, where we analyze how stable the grid is to take in how much renewable energy and whether it needs revamping or complete overhaul. It is a reality that the energy infrastructure in SIDS are aged and needs a lot of work. But there are options that we can slowly, bring in renewable energy and, maintain that stability without any intermittency. But the road is long. Eventually, It has to be overhauled. It can be done in parts because, it can be isolated and, upgrades be done. But it needs money, it needs technology, and commitment from everyone, political commitment, as well as from the development partners.
Now, how does the private sector fit into the future of green tech? What is their role? How do they fit into the future of green tech?
Private sector has a role to play. That is why we have been, targeting them in this capacity building, for power purchase agreements, because we really see the importance of their role, not only in ownership but also in sustainability. They'll own it. They'll have vested interest for the return of investment. So definitely they need that. But I think there's also sensitivity when it comes to legislations and regulations that are in place that government need to look into, and ensure that these are in place to safeguard the private sector interest as well as the government interest whilst meeting the energy needs of the nation.
Now, I'd want to ask you, and I suspect that this might very well be a challenge, is striking the balance between private sector involvement and public policy a real stumbling block in terms of your efforts?
I think some countries have started with fiscal policies where they are already, their tax exemptions for renewable energy tools and energy efficiency appliances. And that's the start for the private sector. Some they are providing subsidies. And if only governments could just use some of the fossil fuel subsidies, because seeds still spend a lot of money on fossil fuels, and channel that to private sector engagement, or to the uptake of renewables, or address the low-hanging fruit, which is energy efficiency. I think that will take us far and secure the energy, the supply, addressing energy independence and energy security for seeds.
Now, for the benefit of our listeners, can you just spell it out as to why it is so important for us to act now?
It's very clear in the special IPCC report, the report that is allied to the Paris Agreement, that especially small island developing states, we have special circumstances and needs. The science have spoken, but we just have to look outside our own homes to see the reality. The seashores are being washed away. The trees are disappearing. Our livelihoods have been affected. Lives have now been impacted.
All right. Thank you, Arieta. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into the green tech revolution and the work that you're doing with small island states. I wish you all the success that this world needs in the future. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, and it's been an honor talking with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Now, conversations like these show us that green tech entrepreneurs are investing in a future which we may actually live in. You're not alone in the climate crisis. Arieta and Stanley provided us with words of support and solidarity. So, even if we shift towards greener economies with renewable energy, we will still have to change the way that we live. In other words, we have to adapt. Tune in next week to hear more about adaptation techniques. See you then. I'm your host for Islands on Alert, Andy Liebert. Islands on Alert is produced by Leila Henry and Louis Price under the Alliance of Small Island States media team. Special thanks to Tashwa James and Bianca Bedu for additional scripting. Join us next time.